Housing in America reflects many us and them divides. The nation's homeless crisis is often in the spotlight, and there is plenty of attention on the distinction between owning and renting a home. But there are layers of nuance and some irony in all of that housing data. Homeownership is one of the most common ways to build wealth, especially for future generations. West Virginia presents the complexities of that equation. The Mountain State has the nation's highest home ownership rate, but the second lowest personal income rate. One thing remains clear. Across the United States, finding housing is a challenge.
Right now, there are several markets where either housing doesn't exist or it's being bought out from under first-time home buyers before they get the opportunity to do so.
Jim King is CEO of FAHI, an organization that brings people, organizations, and resources together to build houses and communities in Appalachia.
So I suppose it matters who you ask, but I think folks who are looking for housing, and that seems to be an increasing number almost daily, more people looking for housing units than are available and that you'd want to live in.
FAHI works with more than 50 community-based nonprofits in 6 Appalachian states to offer housing leadership in one of the most difficult places to serve in the country.
We have about 3.8 million households in Appalachia, and by several measures, you've got a 500,000 people who are living in either homes that were built before 1930, or you have a family that is living below 30% area median income. There were cuts to the HUD budget out of the federal budget this year, and so even federal assistance has really taken a hit, and that gives people less buying power. So all things equal, right? If your income is very low, your ability to find a decent place to live is very, very limited.
King says to understand today's housing problems, you need to go back to the 1970s.
We were building almost 500,000 homes in this country that were 1,400 square feet or smaller. By 2010, that number was less than 100,000 units of housing being built in that bandwidth. And by 2020, we were under 50,000 a year. We stopped building homes that people can afford. And if you go back to, say, the GI Bill, we made a commitment as a country to actually make ownership of housing a really, really important part of the American life. And so when we started to just pull back from those resources, and so now we're talking decades. By the time you get to the 2008 crisis, what we did was we blamed the subprime market, which it wasn't actually the issue. But again, the market pulled back again from that, saying, well, based on people's income, we got to be careful about who we offer mortgages to.
We can't expect to build all of the housing that we need without supports from the federal government, but they've gotten out of the business of doing that, and we haven't found an alternative solution. So here we are kind of like, what do we do? But we've done it in the past, and we could do it again.
Mel Jones is co-director of the Virginia Center for Housing Research at Virginia Tech University. She works with FAHI and has analyzed housing trends that show approximately 190,000 homes were removed from central Appalachia between 2015 and 2021. Dilapidated homes were torn down or converted to business or commercial uses. The transition can lead to low vacancy rates and can drive up the cost of housing. Landlords may also be less willing to opt into affordable housing programs. Low vacancy in an area creates tight markets, which results in more competition and increases the cost of developing new housing. Jones says that while the GI Bill helped build generational wealth over decades, a lot of people were left out.
Which means that their families haven't accumulated the wealth that they need to pass on from generation to generation to ensure that folks are stable. So the people my age, and I'm among the oldest millennials, right? The people my age that are readily able to buy homes largely are able to do that because of intergenerational wealth. And when you don't have those generations of wealth, you don't have access to safe, stable housing anymore. There is this idea that anybody could become homeless at any time. Something, awful could happen. You could have a huge medical expense and lose everything and experience homelessness. And we do hear stories like that. But largely, housing insecurity is related to generations of being left out. And we see that manifest in Appalachia, and those people who are living in these old trailers. And we see it manifest in more urban places, people living in the worst kind of rental housing. A single family home that's not been cared for by the landlord for years and years and years, and they're still paying, large amounts of money, even relative to the rest of the market, to rent that unit. So this does have its roots, I would not say in a political divide, but rather just the way that we set this country on a track for wealth building that didn't include everybody and still doesn't include everybody. It's become an us and them scenario.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us. I'm Trey Kay. While Appalachia boasts some of the nation's highest rates in homeownership, there's another reality at work. Much of that housing is old and needs repair. In one West Virginia county, 67% of the homes are more than 80 years old, and half rate below normal on standard quality measures. It's another side of the housing crisis that we don't hear about as often. Structures in disrepair, without electricity or running water, that many people call home.
A lot of folks have been caring for their home over time themselves. And as they get older, they can't do that anymore. And then they can't find the contractors or afford the contractors to help with that maintenance and upkeep. Water is one of the biggest problems that intrudes in our house and begins to cause it to decay. And when someone sees the leak, but they can't do anything about it, then that quickly becomes a compromised roof, a compromised wall, compromised floor with holes in it.
Jones says it's common for rural West Virginians to struggle to maintain their homes, especially as they get older.
We're talking about a big problem, right? It's not just those poorest people, right? We're talking about, in many cases, 30% of the population that's struggling with housing issues. Now, the housing issues have different flavors, but those people who struggle with poor housing conditions, are many of those people. And the issue has become so large because we haven't been able to have incomes keeping up with housing costs since the 70s, And so we've been essentially digging this hole since the 70s and 80s. And all of the boomers have basically had stagnant incomes for the most of their career. They haven't been able to put the money that they should into their home. And when I say should, I don't mean like they haven't been saving to put it into their home, or I just mean that their home needs certain attention, right? But they haven't had enough income to do that and do the other things that they need to do, like food and clothing and medical care and transportation. If you go to more rural places or even certain parts of urban places where the worst housing is and people live in the worst housing in the country, those units that were built prior to 1976, before there was any kind of code to regulate how those units were built, and sometimes they have not held up well over time. They often have dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde that sort of ooze from them in their old age. And then the walls have very little or no insulation. And when those walls fail, people, because they have no other housing option, try to fix it with whatever means they have available, whether that be a tarp left over from some natural disaster somewhere, something that a neighbor gave them to try to fix the home, or things that they found along the road to do the best that they can on an extremely meager income.
Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Sorry, it's a little
That's Stacy Reeder. She's a veterinarian visiting a patient, a dog named Sassy, and the pup's owner, Joyce Vest. They first met several years ago during a home visit to check on the dog. That's when Stacy noticed that Joyce was living out of a home that needed some repairs. Joyce says she was living in 2 trailers that were connected.
I had 2 trailers. I had one trailer in the back of the other. I had them so close together that I could put a roof over and go from one trailer to the other.
Joyce Vest lives in Faber, Virginia. She's 76 years old and suffers from emphysema. Joyce didn't have running water or electricity in her trailer, and the walls were damaged by storms.
The first time I ever had running water was after they came in and built this house for me and dug that well. And that was about, 8 years ago?
Joyce is talking about the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, or SEERCAP. The organization provides various programs to homeowners from Delaware to Florida, including septic and well programs, community development projects, and indoor plumbing.
You were catching water in barrels. She was catching water in barrels.
Back then, I was catching the water in the barrel for cleaning and cooking and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. I got a big pot out there now that you heat water in, for bath and stuff, all that.
Well, first of all, you're talking about capturing water, so she didn't have running water out here.
No, I did not.
You had 2 trailers, and then you kind of made a roof yourself, and it sounds like there were tarps. That doesn't sound like it would have been very warm in the wintertime.
I used wood. I had a flue that I had built in it for heat. Matter of fact, I got my wood stove out there now that I used to use for having heat in here. Or like I said, in there.
Yeah.
For sitting there. I had a flue in there.
How'd that look to you?
Scary, like it was going to catch fire. It always scared me when you started that stove that it was going to...
It's been all my life.
Yeah.
I burned wood and kept warm from that stove all my life. Up until approximately about 6 years ago.
Joyce grew up on the land that her new house is built on. The Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project helped to construct that new home she now lives in. Joyce says her father built a previous home for her, but that had to be demolished. Then someone donated 2 trailers. As I talked with Joyce and Stacy, her veterinarian, we sat in her brand new 2-bedroom home. So in a way, you came out here to take care of a pet, mm-hmm. to check to see if the living conditions for the pet were doing well. And in many ways, what you found is that they weren't so great for the pet, but also not for the human as well either.
Yeah, when I came out here, I realized that that's not a way for her to live. And if I could help her, we were going to do so. And so we started searching and looking, and it was a couple years before we had the house. Yeah. But it was just one of those things that was on my heart that I had to do. To be honest with you, I didn't realize people lived like that, like without the electricity and without water. And I'm not sure how she did, but she did. She did. She managed. So it was an eye-opening experience for me.
When we come back from a break, we'll hear about the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, or SEERCAP, how they built Joyce's new home, and the challenges the organization faces while helping residents.
Since the house is in such poor condition, we were going to be building a new house for her. So now somebody has to figure out, well, what sort of plan are you going to use? We have plans in place that we use for her already. Well, the building department approved these plans. It's a daunting task.
That's coming up after a break. You're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part with a grant from the CRC Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and this is Us and Them from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. After veterinarian Stacy Reeder saw the condition of Joyce Vest's home, she knew she had to take action. Searches online led her to the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project, or SERCAP. Kenneth Rogers is a rural housing specialist with the project, and he explains what happens when someone first reaches out for help.
The way our triage goes here at our office, Ellen Smith is our housing coordinator, and Ellen will go through a phone screening just to find out their name, their information, which county they live in. And she gets that information because it can vary about the funding sources that we have available to take care of the person's need. And once she gets that information, then she'll send them out an application, and she'll start the process of getting them approved to be in the program.
SERCAP helped Joyce Vest enroll in the Indoor Plumbing and Rehabilitation Program, or IPR.
It's designed for low to moderate income homeowners who have no indoor plumbing, no potable water, or a failed septic system. In her case, she had no well, she had no indoor bathroom, and she definitely did not have a septic system. So she fit the qualifications for all of the IPR program.
And the fact that you have such a program means that must be a common challenge.
Yes, it is a common challenge oftentimes because even though people may have had a septic system that was put in 50 years ago, now it's failed or is not doing well, that needs to be abandoned and a new one needs to be in place because the new requirements for water regulations and groundwater contamination, the old system may not work any longer the way that it was before. And if you have somebody that's 70, 80 years old and they've been living in their house for all these years, and suddenly their septic system fails, and now they need to get a new system, and it's an alternative system. The alternative system may be $40,000, and they're living on a fixed income, and they have no way of repairing or fixing or putting in that new system.
I asked Kenneth Rogers if Joyce Vest was typical of the clients they see at SERCAP.
I would say the severity of her situation was atypical. Most of the clients that we have oftentimes, they may have a house and it may be in reasonably good condition. Hers was really severe in that it was a mobile home. It was something I think somebody had donated to her, so it was in poor condition when she got it. And over the years, the walls just started to deteriorate and fall away, and she didn't have the money or the means to fix it. And by the time we first started working with her and actually got back to her, a windstorm came through and blew away more of the walls and tarps and things that she had. She had a wood stove, and she would go out and chop and cut down her own firewood, and she would cook and heat her food on the top and build a fire in the wood stove, and that's how she lived. I mean, she was essentially modern-day camping, I guess you considered.
I mean, she seemed like a frontierswoman. She
was. She was a frontierswoman. She actually told us she would go out hunting on occasions and find something to kill, to eat, and she'd bring it home. She'd also garden in the back. She had her own garden. I think she was used to living that way, but I don't think it was a direct choice to live this way. It was she was getting the best that she could for what she could afford and what she could work with. And she had a home, she had the land, and she said, I'm going to make a go of it. This is what I'm going to live in.
Though her situation may have been more extreme, Joyce Vest represents many people who live in a home without indoor plumbing or running water.
85 to 90% of the people we're working with are living in poor living conditions because that's all they can afford and all they can get done. We've done work in one county where the gentleman had a nice concrete block home, but there was no water and no sewer, and he had a closet with a plastic bucket in it, and that's what he used for his bathroom. We had a gentleman in that same county who also had a mobile home, and he didn't have any water or bathroom, and nobody ever knew it. He would go down to the fire station, Walmart, other places, use the bathroom, get water, and that's how he lived. And so people tend to learn how to survive, and that's what the people we're working with. They're survivalists. They find a way to survive. They don't necessarily tell anybody about it or bother anybody about it. They just find a way to continue to live. We did another project for a lady up in another county about 2-3 hours from here. She had a relatively nice-looking house, but it did not have an indoor bathroom, and she had what we considered gray water that she'd use for her sink and her shower, and she had a collection system. She had a metal roof, and I asked her, how'd you collect water? She said it would rain for 15 minutes. That would clean off everything. Then I'd turn my diverter valve, and I have a cistern over here in the ground, and that's where I'd catch my rainwater to drink and to live and to eat.
These projects take a lot of persistence on the part of the homeowner and the Community Assistance Project. Roger says most of their projects are designed for completion in 60 to 90 days, but more complex cases can take a year or two.
We have to collect lots of information from them. We have to line up the health department, the local building official, the homeowner, the contractor. And so we have to be persistent to want to get this project done, because there's some companies, organizations that do something similar to what we do. If they go in and there are some complications, the homeowner's not willing to give them things through email or other things, if they can't make it an easy, quick project, they're not persistent enough to get the people's services. Because I do know that she had talked to other people in the area before about her conditions, but for some reason, they didn't do what they needed to do to make sure she wasn't living in those conditions any longer.
But it takes a while, and I can see where somebody might give up.
Oh, sure. Both them and us. But it takes persistence on both our parts to get the project done.
This is what you do. And you certainly do know and understand where there's certain hurdles and barriers and things that make it impossible legally to do certain things. But I guess when I look at her, I can see where this seems like a lot of red tape and a lot of bureaucracy, and it would be something hard to navigate.
Sure. It would. And that's the reason we stay with them and continue to work with the people, because just dealing with the health department first because in this particular case, she didn't have a septic system or a well. So you have to go through all the things with the health department to say, oh, you're going to need a survey. So we have to go out and get a survey to make sure of the property boundaries. And then once you get that completed, then now you go to the health department. Because for us as an IPR, Indoor Plumbing and Rehabilitation Program, if we can't get a septic system to work on the property and a well to work on the property, we can't go any further, because we have to have those things in place so that we can get the project done for them. And for the homeowner to go through all these things is a daunting task. It's something that they may never be able to or never even want to do, because it takes quite a bit. And it also takes money. Currently, the health department permits for well and septic is almost $800 just to get that permit to put the well and the septic on the property. And in her particular case, since the house is in such poor condition, we were going to be building a new house for her. So now somebody has to figure out, well, what sort of plan are you going to use? We have plans in place that we use for it already. Okay, so we have the plan. Will the building department approve these plans? And where will that house need to sit on this lot to make sure it's a certain distance from the well, from the septic system, and from the property boundaries? So all that stuff has to be done up front. I mean, we're literally housing developers on a really, really tight budget. So we get all those things done, and then after that's done, we could very well say, okay, you're ready to get your house built, but now we are actually working, we sign and work with the contracts with the homeowner and the contractor so that we can actually get the house built so that things are done correctly, the building official can sign off on it, and that the homeowner has a wonderful, viable home when we're done there that has no problems or issues.
These home improvement projects present a range of challenges. While plans and permits and approvals are essential, nothing happens without the money to pay for it.
And the funders for us do have a limit on what we can spend on each one of these houses. So then we have to work to negotiate with the contractor to say, okay, we know you built a house like this down the street for $200,000. We only have $150,000. What do we need to do to get our house to $150,000?
Don't people make the argument it's fine for Joyce Vest to live where she does in a rural location in the country, but it would be more efficient if she were to live maybe at a place where it was a more energy efficient building, that she's with other people? And is it efficient for dollars that would come from SURCAP, et cetera, to help her build a better place to live when maybe that money could be spent more effectively someplace else?
Well, I understand your question. I think there are different realms and avenues for affordable housing. We have done some of our projects to where once we interviewed and talked with the family, we told them what they were going through. The best decision for them was, we think we're just going to let our house go and we're going to move to an apartment complex. And we are not so tunnel vision or so pointed in our direction that we're going to build your house whether you like it or not. We're coming in to provide the best housing for them that they want to have. And of course, we're still in America where there's liberty and freedom. And if somebody wants to live out in the rural areas where they are, we're going to make them or help them to stay in the rural areas where they own their land. But if they decided, I can't keep up with this land, it's too much of a burden, we have worked with some clients who said, okay, we're just going to let this go and we're going to move into an apartment.
In many ways, generally speaking, poverty is part of the big problem here.
Yes, poverty is a problem. And I guess when we say the word poverty, you might think of somebody that's necessarily what people think as poor. I'm using air quotes there. But if you're on a fixed income and you can take care of your food and your water and your electricity and utilities, but you have a major housing issue, and if you're on a fixed income and you go to the bank and say, oh, my septic system failed, I need to put in a $40,000 septic system, and my income is $40,000 a year, they're probably not going to give you a loan to put in that septic system. So you may not be considered poverty, but you're on a fixed income and you need a $40,000 septic system to put in. Well, banks aren't really jumping at the bit to loan that because they can't repossess it, they can't take it back. It's just money they're going to give you based on who you know or what they think your credit standing is with the bank.
Mel Jones, who researches housing trends at the Virginia Center for Housing Research at Virginia Tech University, says solutions to the housing crisis will require a combined effort.
No local government has enough money to solve this problem. No state government has enough money to solve this problem. It's going to take local, state, and federal funding all together, and in a large amount, federal funding, because they're really the only ones that have the access to the financing that's needed to build massive amounts of housing. And so without everybody sort of getting in line and saying, we care that so many people don't have good housing. And in addition to that, we care that even those people who have good housing don't have the housing that they would prefer, unless we can all kind of get on the same boat and say, we want to see this, it's not going to happen. And I think that the crux of the issue may have to do with the local level instead of the federal government. We need the federal government's financing to make it happen. But at the local level, people don't want to see more housing.
That seems like an ironic statement. At a time when there's a critical need for affordable housing, to say some people don't want more housing units? Mel Jones could see I was confused, so she went on to explain.
So right now we're in Blacksburg, right? And here we have a great demand for housing. Blacksburg is only growing between students and businesses and retirees. People want to live here. There's huge demand for housing. But we don't build enough housing. So what happens? The price of housing goes up. And those people who already own houses in Blacksburg, that only benefits them, right? I bought my house for $225,000. It's now estimated to be worth $444,000 7 years later, almost doubled in value. And that benefits me, right? That's a huge amount of equity and wealth that I'm building. And if I'm worried about my situation and my family's situation in the future, what's in my interest is to have no more housing built here because my house will only keep increasing in value, right? And I often say that we have put the middle class and those below the middle class in such a tenuous situation for such a long time that now when they see the value of their house skyrocketing, suddenly the retirement plan that they didn't have, they now have. The kids that they weren't going to be able to pass anything on to, they have something to pass on to. And anything that threatens that is no. And people who live in a place, right, they're the constituents of the local government who make up the zoning, who make up the rules about whether or not we can add more housing. And so you put people in a place where they're choosing between themselves and their family and sort of the good of other people in their community. And I think that that's a hard choice to make. And a lot of times people make the wrong choice.
Jones fears the lack of affordable housing hurts our communities in other ways.
I also like to point out to people that don't you want the person who's taking care of your kid to live in your community? Don't you want them to have to look you in the eye when they go to the grocery store? Or do you want them to be somebody who had to commute 2 hours in and you don't really know and you don't ever see? I mean, we're deteriorating the trust and relationships in our community by excluding people or making them live in horrible conditions. Once you start thinking about it, it seems obvious to provide people with safe, decent housing, whether you are an attorney or a computer programmer or a housing researcher and you happen to have enough money to pay for housing versus if you're a cashier at the Kroger or the Dollar General or a barista at the Starbucks or a home health aide or a childcare worker and can not afford housing, period. We need all of these people. It would be very hard for many people to go out and get their large incomes without somebody to watch over their children and somebody to make them lunch, somebody to deliver their groceries. And so at some point, everybody just has to realize that if we continue to exclude people and say only people who can afford housing get it, then eventually we will lose the people who take care of our elders or take care of our children.
Is there a unique housing challenge in rural Appalachia?
I think mainly from the point of view of investment. I just don't think that we attract the investment in housing in Appalachia like we can in some other places. As the economy has shifted, the physical spaces have also shifted, and where people want to live and, where people can make money on their investments in housing has changed, and that's left a lot of parts of West Virginia and Appalachia looking a lot different than they used to. But Trey, just like in Southern Virginia, not part of Appalachia, we used to build a lot of furniture, and we don't do that much there anymore. And so as a result, it looks very similar to Appalachia. And the economic shifts are going to happen no matter what. We have to find a way to be resilient in response to those because things change. And, we have this, in air quotes, free market economy that allows for those shifts. And so we have to be ready for them, right? And we have to help people move along with. We can't just abandon them in a place that has no economic opportunity anymore, nor can we ask them, oh, this housing over there, nobody wants that, go live there, right? Because again, they have no economic opportunity there. And I often say that, if we want to improve our housing situation, we have to do that in lockstep with community development, right?
So ultimately, the housing market is something of a chicken and egg situation.
You're not going to have people wanting to live there unless there are certain services available. And so you might create a nice house for somebody who's willing to move to Bluefield as is, but then you have to depend on that person and the other people in Bluefield to improve the quality of life there so that you can attract the next few people who, are looking for a little bit different lifestyle. And then you had to build houses for them. And then you had to make it a little better. And then you had to build houses for those next newcomers, and it's really has to be done in tandem. Housing is part of the infrastructure of a community, but so are roads and hospitals and restaurants and hiking and childcare is an enormous one. You have to have all of these things functioning together in order for individuals to want to make investments in their house, right? Because they have to feel like when they along the road sell that house, they're going to recover those investments. So it's all connected.
As I talked to Mel Jones and Kenneth Rogers, I thought a lot about what the meaning of home is. It's more than four walls and a roof over your head. It's a place where you make memories and can feel safe. Joyce Vest never complained about her living situation, whether she was living in a house her father built or a trailer with no running water. She called them and her newly built house home. And it's clear the memories she's made over the decades are important to her.
This is home.
Mm-hmm.
Right here.
Right here is home. This is the beginning. And this is where I'm going to stay. If the Lord see fit, this is where I'm be until my time. Till the Lord get with me, this is where I'm be. This is where I first remember my home being, which my father had built years ago. I think I was about 6-7 years old. I moved to D.C. I was in Charlottesville. And this was back home.
But this is home.
This is home, right here.
And this is why you want to be here.
Yeah, this is why I want to be here. Because this is where I remember a true home. This is where my father built that first house that I remember we lived in. Right here on these grounds.
For many people in Appalachia, home is a place to make memories. But it also may be a place that's in need of repair. There are scores of nonprofit organizations and church groups that work to help make improvements. But creating affordable housing from older structures takes time and resources that can be in short supply. However, it's a critical step to help homeowners and their communities thrive. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Samantha Gatzik, and Kate Smith. Michael Lipton, Tristam Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the CRC Foundation. Hey, we'd love to get your thoughts about this episode. Would you share them on our Facebook page or on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Us Them Podcast? Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the mentorship program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.